time for Cutting Edge Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnet Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And welcome to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here.
With Barnet Bain. Good moment, everyone. Good moment, Freeman.
Good moment.
Good to see you. Spence, good moment to our producer, our erstwhile producer. Nice hat. Always impressed by your headgear. So how have you been?
I've been good.
Yeah?
Yeah, I've been doing a little work down south. I've been here, of course, in the United States, but working with a big bank in Mexico.
Yeah.
Doing, with my female partner.
Let's get that new mariachi gig.
Yeah, that's right. Doing a women in leadership training. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There's a couple things about it I think are really quite profound for me.
Yep.
We work with the translator. So, of course, I speak English, and then the translator will translate into Spanish. Mm-hmm. And what I have come to really recognize, because there's a few things about it. One is that I can't explain a lot, because every sort of sentence or so I have to stop and the translator says what I say. So all of my stories are gone. I can't tell stories. Yeah. But what's wonderful about it is it's not information that's important. It's energy. You know, and I could conceptually understand that maybe before this experience.
Yes, it's a different kind of data transmission. It is not
totally.
You can't pull on the thread of logic and reason.
Exactly.
It is a resonance that you're
the minute you get into a long explanation, you're dead.
So we're sunk, basically.
we
have no possibility.
We won't translate very well into Spanish and so forth. Well, no, look, this is it. Is that I think the underlying resonance, the quality of how we show up, you know, sort of intention. What's the intention underneath what we're saying? Becomes more relevant. I mean, it's always relevant. It's just this is an interesting way of seeing that reflected back. Yeah.
So what I love particularly about that sharing is that we do clearly operate, communicate, relate, correlate on so many levels and so many dimensions of experience, and being forced out of the comfort zone, being forced out of our own. Out of our own habituated set of communications and into having to rely on the spirit, the where you're coming from, the heart-centeredness in order to communicate a sense of who you are. It's a whole different. It's an entirely different modulation, completely different.
Yeah, it is.
So I think that, you know, as luck would have it, or something, or forces more concrete than luck.
We do this two-step each week. Like, oh, guess what we've got?
Guess who we have? Like we didn't know. Who do we have?
That's
like we didn't know.
Your job.
Now we have our really good friend Dawson Church. Dawson, for those of you who do not know, is the author of the bestseller "The Genie in Your Genes." And for those of you that are on YouTube or want to go to YouTube after seeing this, hearing this, you can see this book here, because I'm holding it on camera. He's also the founder of the National Institute for Integrative Healthcare. His research has been widely published, and he is the editor of Energy Psychology, Theory, Research, and Treatment. And I know, Freeman, that you love the centerfolds in that. And,
yeah.
No, he says he only reads the he gets it because he only reads the articles.
That's right. Welcome, Dawson.
No, I think you may have just hit upon a brilliant idea for increasing circulation. I've been thinking about how do you increase the circulation of a peer-reviewed scientific journal, and no one has ever thought of centerfolds before. So you promised me creativity, Barnet, and you certainly delivered with that idea.
I'm your man. I am your man. It's good to have you with us, Dawson. What happened to you?
If I were to tell my scientific colleagues about the centerfolds idea, I'm going to use this in my next talk to a group of scientists. This is definitely going to cause a sensation in the whole scientific community. So I'm thrilled. Thank you.
I'm going to shoot it.
Well, and if I remember back to my elementary school days at St. Monica's, we thought National Geographics were great because it was science.
It was educational.
Right?
It was educational. That's the one journal that Dawson does not write for. But
right. No, but it was the photos, right?
Exactly.
It was the centerfold, as it were.
Only read it for the articles.
That's right.
So Dawson, I know that you have thoughts around this issue. The levels at which we communicate, the many levels and the complexity through which we communicate and we relate to each other below the comfort zone and often below the scene.
Well, there's this argument for the last while in scientific circles about certain aspects of how we do operate, and there are people who are very focused on our energy, just like Spence was mentioning earlier, when you have to work with a translator in front of a large group and you have to pause every sentence to let the translator translate. I have the same experience every year in France where I go and teach. And at my first lectures in France a few years back were quite comical because I'd walk across the stage in a sweeping gesture and then with my arms outstretched have to stay in suspended animation for 2 minutes while the translator repeated what I just said. And I'd reanimate myself and then walk across the stage and make the next grand gesture and then have to pause again. It was quite funny. Now I've gotten used to it. That comment that our energy communicates itself is a really powerful one. And just as you would get an MRI or an EEG or a SPECT scan, there are many technologies for identifying what your human bioenergy, what your electromagnetic energy body looks like. But that's one part of us. Another part of us is the physical body and all of the hormones and neurotransmitters that drive our behavior and shape our perception, of course, our nervous systems, our organ systems as well. But when all of these things are dancing together in a congruent flow, it's one of my favorite words, congruence. If you were to watch that speaker up there, and if he weren't congruent, you'd be able to tell, like somebody telling you a lie, somebody saying something insincere. There's some part of our perceptual field that will recognize when someone isn't genuine. And when someone is genuine, when their energy, when their biology, when their belief system, when their body language, when it all lines up, then you have a speaker who's congruent, and people have a powerful experience, powerful transmission from that person, both of the energy and of the information. So I'm just really drawn to the whole field of research about how energy interacts with matter, and there's a lot more happening in this research field now, and it's producing some phenomenal insights as well as spectacular healings in some cases.
I love it. And I love the science meeting things that in our field, and I'm saying "our" in a general sense. I mean, in this particular case, I'm talking about leadership training, right? So the congruence that we're looking for is where the person's vision, where what's behind the choices they're making is congruent, right? That we're really helping them define for themselves, what do they stand for? What are they trying to create in the world? And that it actually is at the level of energy. We on the show have had many folks from Heart Math on, and I know you're a fan of Heart Math. The whole idea of coherence, which is another great word, similar to this congruency, where there's the energies are flowing sort of in the same way, right? They're matching up. The waves are matching up in the same way that creates this coherence, which of course is the congruency, right?
And what is happening is that coherence is having profound effects on your biology. I did one study where I compared a one-session therapy, and in fact, I've just had a big psychology anthology published with an article of mine on one single-session therapy. But we gave these people a one-session, hour-long therapy session, either of conventional talk therapy or of the main method I teach called EFT, or tapping, emotional freedom techniques. And we gave one session, but we measured their biology before and after. So both their psychology, their anxiety and depression, but their biology. We found that the group that got emotional freedom techniques, their cortisol levels dropped dramatically compared to the group that got talk therapy, and their anxiety and depression dropped by more than double the amount of the people who got talk therapy. So there are these new techniques now that are affecting us not just on the level of psychological improvement and mental health and psychospiritual awareness, but they're affecting us when we have shifts on that level. It reaches deep, deep down into the level of the genes that code for stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, as well as our main longevity hormone, DHEA. So all of these hormones and neurotransmitters are shifting in our bodies based on our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, and our experiences. And this is an exciting new field called epigenetics, showing how genes are literally being shaped by our experience. And so that shift you're feeling in energy, Spence, is being echoed down at the level of which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off inside your cells.
So this new field of epigenetics, this in many ways this relationship of biology and psychology is the implications of this, and many of our listeners are well aware of this. The implications of this are monumental. This is probably more of this is probably a greater experience than when human beings first stood upright, or the advent of opposable thumbs. Right. This is so monumental. This idea that DNA is not is not predestined, and that there are, I think it's peptides in our DNA, 4 of them that. In various combinations, in the way that our computers and internet is, it's either on or off, 1s and 2s. We have 4 peptides that are running on base. We're running on base 4, out of which the whole of human expression is outplayed, and we are now beginning to be able to have a relationship, to interact with that base 4 system, and rewire our DNA. So I know you have...
consciously.
Consciously.
Do it consciously.
Genie in your genes is largely, is this spectacularly stimulating overview, 385 pages of overview of everything cool that is happening in this whole area of consciously rewiring and rewriting your template. Geez, I don't even know where you should begin on that, but why don't you start by speaking a little bit about what is happening at the front of epigenetic medicine?
Sure. Well, epigenetics was first discovered really got going in the mid-1990s and has since become a distinct field of its own. And it displaced the old theory of genetic determinism, which has been dominant for most of the previous half century. So that old theory was that it's all in your genes. If you look at Crick and Watson, who discovered the double helix spiral shape of the DNA molecule, they coined that term they called the central dogma of molecular biology, that your genes determine everything about you. And so this
what a thrilling title. I'm exhilarated. The central dogma. So those guys needed a press, they needed a publicist.
Well, you think that scientists can't be dogmatic and are open-minded and use only the scientific method. They'll tell you, if I were to look for a bunch of prejudiced people and I was to go to either a scientific convention or a fundamentalist faith rally, I think I'd probably choose the fundamentalist.
Yeah, go to the fundamentalists.
If you're looking for open-minded people, right?
Go to the fundamentalists. Because what is so thrilling is under the science. This is a wholesale rebooting of what it means to be a human being. There's nothing short of that.
Yeah. What you said earlier is so apt, because the opposable thumb was the result of a genetic mutation. And so evolution's been progressing now for 3.4 billion years based on random mutations. So there's random mutation in a cell or an organism. It produces, doesn't produce anything useful at all, but occasionally it produces something like an opposable thumb. If it produces something unusable, like an extra 2 fingers, then it's discarded. But it occasionally has something really useful that pops up. And then Mother Nature likes to experiment. and see how many of these things she can produce. So we'll find the useful ones. That's the old model, and that's how we've evolved now for billions of years. What's now happening is that as we think, as we evoke new states of consciousness, as we do the kinds of therapies that I'm advocating in the Genie in Your Genes, as we those things, we're literally shifting our gene expression by our consciousness. Like I can be this morning. It's hard to believe, Barnett, but I woke up feeling grumpy. Now,
no,
believe it or not. So I did some meditation. I talked to my wife, who is an exceptionally loving human being, and after that I felt great. What I was doing was I was shifting my consciousness from that grumpy state to that happy state. But what was also happening was that I was turning off certain genes. I was turning off the genes that code for cortisol, adrenaline, and all of the other stress-related hormones in my body. And I was turning on the ones that code for feel-good hormones, feel-good neurotransmitters. So we are literally shaping which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off by our beliefs, by our thoughts, by our emotions. And we have the power to do this deliberately. So we're actually being epigenetic engineers of our own bodies, of our own lives. And this is a completely different phenomenon to have consciousness interacting with biology and evolution in that way. And the results of this are going to be, I think, profoundly different from if evolution has simply kept on grinding ahead with only random mutation.
So there's two things that come to mind. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, there's something that, I don't know if you know Andy Newberg, but we had him on, I don't know, maybe a year ago. Anyhow, something he said that was really interesting. He said that in the past, scientists were very quick to dismiss anomalies. Now, the new science, we run towards the anomaly, which I thought was really interesting in that, again, going back to what you said about going to the sort of wanting to be right and holding things very tightly in the scientific community versus this exciting, sort of blowing open of old ideas where we're running towards the anomaly versus dismissing it. That's one piece of the puzzle that I'd love to come back to. But I don't also want to just let go of the ability to direct, that the knowledge base and the opening again is expanding all kinds of possibilities. So those are the two ideas. I'll let you mull that over while we take a commercial break, and we'll be back here on Cutting Edge Consciousness.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And we are back here on Cutting Edge Consciousness. Thanks for sticking with us. It's Freeman and Barnett here with Dawson Church, author of The Genie in Your Genes. So consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the mind. That's, when I was growing up, that was pretty much the worldview. And that has really been turned inside out, except for those precious and rare intuitives among us and poets who sung the body electric some time ago. We have Dawson Church with us, who is currently singing the body electric loud and clear. So tune up, Dawson. What do you have to say about this phenomenon of the electrical body system? I lost you. About the electrical body system.
Well, it is controversial for one thing. If you look at go on Wikipedia and look up the entry for therapeutic touch. Now, therapeutic touch is a method. If you're a nurse, you can get continuing medical education credit for studying it. There are over 20 randomized controlled trials showing it's effective for a variety of conditions. It's been taught to over 100,000 nurses who use it in their practices. And it uses bioenergy. It's actually called therapeutic touch. There's no actual touch involved. It simply involves holding your hand near the field of the body of a patient. But there's a field interaction there between the fields of the person offering healing and the person needing healing. And that's why you see these spectacular results sometimes of therapeutic touch in patients in studies. But go and read the Wikipedia entry on therapeutic touch, and you'll discover none of the above. You'll discover that it's pseudoscience, that it has no scientific background, and it'll list one study which gave a negative result. So that's kind of the tussle we're in now. We're in the middle of this the death of this old paradigm, but there are these diehard skeptics who will do anything to disprove these new therapies based on energy, based on field effects, and then there is this mounting evidence that these fields have enormous effects on us, not just locally, but distantly. One of the most difficult chapters for me to write, in fact, I tried to avoid writing this chapter in The Genie in Your Genes. I thought, okay, this is such a scary topic of non-local effects of healing. I'm just going to ignore it in the book. There's no way. I'm just going to. It's
yeah, good luck. But it's such a triggering topic because it really it is fundamentally threatening to every piece of structure and order and logic and reason. It completely undermines that. It is an entirely different view of the universe and how we relate to it.
It does, and we can't explain it. We have no idea how these distant effects occur. There are ideas, there are hypotheses like quantum entanglement, but we don't really know. So that is the huge quandary that faces us: is that there are these distant effects. And even though I didn't want to write that chapter, I finished the book, and I realized there's so much evidence for these distant effects of healing, of prayer, of intention, of energy transmission, like Taoist masters in China sending energy to people in Western Europe and them having measurable physiological results. So I had to write about this, and these effects are present. So it's obvious that there are these energy fields. They do have an effect, but they don't just have an effect like with healing touch with somebody who's a foot away from you. They have an effect a continent away. And it's remarkable that this happens. We don't yet know why. And when I ask for...
So you're talking about these for our listeners, you're talking about these non-local effects. I mean, there are studies, innumerable studies, many of which you cite, of the effects of, for instance, somebody praying for the well-being of another could be half a world away. And there's efficacy there. And what is even more provocative is that there's efficacy for the one for whom prayer is being offered, and there are measurable results beyond that. There are measurable results for the one that is doing the prayer, and then the one that is receiving the prayer, and there is no apparent causality that fits into the way we currently operate.
Yeah, we have no idea how these effects occur. But what I point out to readers in my book, I say, look, we used quinine for malaria for a century before we had any clue how it worked. We used aspirin for headaches for more than a century before we had any idea of what it did. So just the fact that we don't have an explanation for why it works doesn't mean we should dismiss it. And that's been the tactic used to dismiss many of the new therapies, is critics say, well, we have no idea why this works. We don't need to know why it works, because in medicine, many of the drugs we use, for example, that are effective and that have been used for a long time, we still have no idea how they work. So it takes science a while to develop the explanatory frameworks for how those things work. We don't know how distant healing works. We do know that it works.
And part of what I think we're talking about is and this is, I think of this sort of historically. At one point, the relationship with mystery was one where there was maybe it was young in the sense that we didn't know how to deal with mystery. The Age of Reason brought about a whole shift in the evolutionary process where we started to figure stuff out. The new wave is, again, I think, moving in the direction of embracing the mystery again. There's this sort of relationship with, and Barnett, you've talked about this many times, logic and reason, where it becomes insufficient. And it's almost like the new wave of scientists is almost in the realm of the poet. It's a relationship with, again, the anomaly, as opposed to arguing for the most concise, easiest explanation. There's a desire to splash around in the murky water, right, in the complexity of things. Do you know what I'm talking about, Dawson?
You know what is found, which is fascinating. In the book, I talk about a study done by Baylor University, where I went to school, Baylor in Texas. And at Baylor, they looked at the attitudes of scientists toward the immanent, the immaterial, those energy flows. What that Baylor study found, they've been tracking this for several years now, was that there's been a remarkable rise in belief in the invisible, in spirituality, among hard scientists, physicists, biologists, people in the hard sciences, mathematicians. There's actually been a drop in belief in spirituality among social scientists. That's another matter. But hard scientists are increasingly, there are these lyrical statements that people like Schrödinger and Bohr made, and Einstein certainly made many of them about the nature of the universe. And so, yes, it's hard science, but it does fill you with a sense of awe and a sense that there's some far, far, far greater pattern here than our limited human minds can comprehend.
There's something that comes to mind in that statement. You talk about Einstein and Schrödinger, and you're talking about all of these mystics. They had a quality.
That's great. You call them mystics.
They are mystics.
Yeah,
and you know,
that's actually what I was trying to say.
Dawson and I are friends. So, as a matter of fact, you may know this, Freeman, because you've seen the documentary. I've been working on a documentary.
Oh, yeah.
And Dawson is featured in it, just by the by. But one of the qualities that I recognize in you, Dawson, is that you are a celebrant. So there is one thing about being. It's one thing to be a scholar, and it's quite something else to be a clinician and a researcher. But when it comes together with being a celebrant of discovery and of mystery, then some kind of alchemy happens. There's some kind of synergy of energies that is quite wonderful, and you'll be pleased to be lumped in with Einstein in this conversation. I don't know how many times that's happened before, but this will be a memorable moment. There is this quality of being a celebrant when you read Einstein. There is, as you say, Freeman, there is a poetry to the science. There is a search and an embrace of mystery that is beyond logic and reason, but without abandoning logic and reason.
Absolutely.
Well, I also can tell you that if you look at, I tell the story actually in The Genie in Your Genes about Einstein's theory of relativity. When he hit upon the crucial core concepts of the theory of relativity, it was actually at a period of pronounced despair and depression in his life. He'd been trying to figure these problems out for a long time, not being very successful, and he fell into this black hole. And he was staying at his son-in-law's house at the time. And I tell the story in the book of how he hit this complete wall, fell into despair, and surrendered.
It's a spiritual crisis.
Things happen. He surrendered, and in this flash of insight, the entire thing came to him. It took him a long time to work out the mathematics of it. It took him a time to translate that vision into a concrete mathematical reality he could share with other people. But it came to him at a low point in his life and in a single insight, a single flash of inspiration. And you'll find that many, many, many scientific breakthroughs are done that way. The image of the scientist plotting his or her way through the problem is sometimes the way breakthroughs happen. But often they're those flashes of insight in which you piece together different bits of information. For example, your brain is working differently in those times. Usually, when we're plodding along, we're in beta, this monkey mind, kind of anxious, typical everyday brainwave state. During those flashes of insight, our brain leaps to a much, much higher frequency of gamma. And in gamma, especially when we have a lot of the low-frequency waves of theta and delta as well, what happens is we make connections from different parts of our brains. Parts of the brain that don't normally talk suddenly start chattering with each other, and that's when you have those flashes of insight. So you have this with happiness, you have this with mystical states, you have this with profound breakthroughs in creativity, and that's usually when these quantum leaps in our ideas and our abilities occur.
You know, this, as you're speaking about this, I'm reminded of Star Trek. So in Star Trek, you have Mr. Spock, for whom everything is a beautiful plotting of logic and reason. This computes, this does not compute, this is logical, this is not logical, this follows, this does not follow. And he works in the problem, like an engineer. And then comes up against a challenge, and then it goes over to Captain Kirk, who's totally irrational. He's falling in love. He's just in the middle of a problem. He's falling in love. He's distracted. He's all emotional. And then all of a sudden he has a eureka moment. Aha, I've got it. While he's chasing the girl. Aha, I've got it. And then he hands it over to Mr. Spock. You know,
who figures it out?
Who puts it all together?
Right.
Who puts the pieces back together again? So it is not one. It is not the other. And what is beautiful that in every human being we are both Kirk and Spock. And if we can develop a facility to surrender from one operating mind to the other and create
without making one better or worse.
Exactly.
I think
no
of
hierarchy.
Yeah, well, I think that's where we are today. I think that what has happened, the evolution, is sort of this understanding that there's validity in the rational and there's validity in the not rational, and where the two come together,
they come together.
A beautiful
they come together in the body. At some point, they knit together into an entirely re-blueprinting of the coding, the genetic coding of our body. We are rewriting our biochemistry. Thoughts on that, Dawson?
They come together in the body. That's a good way to put it, because what is common, what I've been looking at, for example, and I've been talking to various scientists and scholars about this, is why do so many approaches have similar results? The one I teach is EFT, but then Joe Dispenza teaches meditation, Roland McCready teaches heart math, but if you look at yoga, look at mindfulness, they're all having similar effects on the body, on cortisol, on DHEA, on serotonin, on oxytocin. And what is the commonality? And the commonality to all of these things is you're in your body. You're in your body when you're having that mystical experience. You're in your body when you're doing yoga. You're in your body when you're doing EFT or tapping. When you're in your body when you're doing heart math. All of these things are anchored by the breath, by the body. I've done a lot of work too with veterans. Our nonprofit has now helped close to 8,000 veterans and their family members who have PTSD. And our track record is remarkable because 9 out of 10 people who've been in our clinical trials are free of clinical PTSD after 6 sessions. So powerful way of shifting PTSD. And again, the commonality is if they're in their body, we train them to relive the bomb blast in Vietnam, relive the sniper attack, relive the mortar attack, relive maybe the death or even the gruesome things like the beheading of a friend. But when they process that memory, rather than zoning out into the cosmos, we teach them to stay in their body, in their breath, and that is critical to processing those memories in a healthy way. When you do that, suddenly those memories no longer have this enormous emotional charge. They're just a memory. They're just something that happened. They're no longer accompanied by that. But the crucial commonality to all of these new and effective therapies is that they keep people in their body while they re-experience the bad thing. So that's the body does indeed tie it all together, Barnett.
Why do you think we are so dissociated from our bodies?
Because it's adaptive when you're a child. When you're 2, 3, 5 years old, I'm just reading a case history from one of my practitioners earlier today, and it's about a little girl who was abused by her uncle when she was 3 and 4 years old. It made complete sense for her to dissociate. That's the only way she could function in her family. So when you were 2, when you were 5, when you were 8, you had a pet that died, you had a friend that moved away, you maybe had a grandparent who died. You had all kinds of losses. You didn't get the person you loved, the person loved didn't love you. All kinds of things happen when we're young. We don't have the ability to really deal with them, so we dissociate, and that enables us to survive. The problem is if you keep on dissociating when you're 20 or 30 or 40 years old, so that very behavior of dissociation that was so useful when we were young becomes really dysfunctional when we're old. And one of my colleagues, Robert Scare, calls it the trauma capsule, that we wrap sheath around these painful memories, painful events. We bury these traumas, and we often bury them in our bodies. That's why when you have a massage, sometimes you have a flood of emotion when the massage therapist hits the muscle where you've got some kind of traumatic association. So in the body, we have those traumas. And when you start to, as an adult, hopefully you have the tools then to start to release those and deal with those. But initially, when you're a kid, that dissociation is completely adaptive. It's the only way you can function in your crazy family.
I get it. It's
the end of
interesting.
dissociation, imagine.
Well, this is it. And I wonder, too, about the collective experience, because there's a mass dissociation. There's I don't want to get nostalgic and sort of go into tribal people and how they had it all together, and
But they were also dissociated.
They had their own dissociation. But what I'm pointing towards when I think about the systemic disassociation is, I think, and this is, we can play with it, is this whole going up into the head, the cutting off of the mystical and going into over-rationalizing. For me, because that was given so much import, right? So much, it feels like there was a sort of necessary evolution out of a naiveness, right? Where we're sort of superstitious and we're to a consciousness that could parcel things out. But then the overdevelopment of that as a better way to operate in the world cut us off from something critical. That happens, I think, at the level of the individual, but I see it collectively. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Whenever one part of your psyche cuts off another part and tries to dominate it, whether it's the mind dominating the emotions or some acceptable part of you dominating some unacceptable part of you, anytime you do that, have that kind of a split, it's going to result in the part that's cut off going into the dark side, going into the shadow, and causing problems later on. So the same thing happens in societies, in the largest sense, when parts of our society are more valued than another. And I'll use some really obvious examples, like women, for example. In the book I talk about how for centuries we were like a computer, trying to use a computer with half the hard drive and half the CPU shut down, because half of our human potential in the form of women wasn't being used in society. So only in the last century have women's as the place of women begun to approach the equality with men. And so suddenly we have all this talent, we have all this ability, we have all these human faculties available that weren't accessible to us, say, a century and a half ago, when women were relegated to sort of second-class citizens. So as we open up to new parts of our society, new parts of our new aspects of who we are as people on a large scale, then we're unlocking the potential that we previously limited by keeping those parts locked up. And so as we learn to value functions, as we learn to value sectors of society, as we learn to value gifts, like, for example, healing. If you were a healer a millennium ago, you might have been burned as a witch. And now you might well have a thriving six-figure practice. So there's now room in our society for all kinds of elements of experience that there wasn't before. And that's part of this process by which consciousness is starting to shape the whole trajectory of evolution, because we're now validating all these parts of the psyche, all these parts of who we are as people that we have been suppressing historically often for centuries or millennia.
And I love the blending. I love the blending of the science, where there's the science and the charging towards the anomaly, the curiosity, and the lyrical element, the almost artistic way that the scientist waits for an answer versus pounds away at the numbers to come up with a mathematical, formula. I mean, the mathematical formula can come. I'm not dismissing it. We now have a new place for it, though, that it can also exist in the space, as it were, where it's awaiting for something, right?
Yeah, and both halves recognize each other equally.
That's it. Hey, listen, this is been brilliant. We've come, though, to the end of the segment. Before we let you go, I'd love to give folks, besides the title of the book, which we've mentioned several times, what is the best website? I know that the tapping, specifically EFT around relationship work, is something you've been doing of late, which I think is brilliant, by the way. Very interested in that. But all the things you've been doing, where should we send folks?
One simple way is to go to the website DawsonGift.com. If you go there, you can download a free copy of the EFT mini manual, as well as some other access to videos, to our practitioner list, and so on. So that's the best website, DawsonGift.com.
Perfect. And that, of course, will be available as well on our website, the Cutting Edge Consciousness website. Dawson, thanks so much for hanging out with us.
So grateful to have you on. One of the one of the most interesting and fun folks.
Totally.
Dawson Church.
And next time you're in LA, when you travel south here in this great state and come to Los Angeles, we'd love to have you in the studio.
That sounds good. I'll be teaching there next year. I'll let you know the dates.
Awesome.
See you soon, man.
And for those of you listening, we invite you to stay tuned because Barnett and I will be back after the break to wrap things up here on Cutting Edge Consciousness. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here with Barnett Bain.
So that was fascinating. Going to be a lot to chew over for the rest of the day. For me, so much, it's just so provocative. I don't think anybody gets out of childhood intact.
No, that's true.
And I'll double down on that. I'm just beginning to realize the degree of my own dissociation and how out of the body that I am. And it's sobering and also thrilling because I have I have a sense now of a way home and how exciting that will be to rediscover. But it's not a simple task to fully be engaged in the body again, to move how I relate. You know, you say to somebody, "Where are you? You know, where do you think you operate from?" And everybody points to their head.
Right.
Not everybody, but most people.
Well, that question of,
You speak to a samurai or to a martial artist, they don't point to their head. They'll point to someplace. And
well, we just did a workshop with Philip Shepard, the lower part of our gut.
Yes.
That was brilliant.
Shepard, who talks about the I can't remember the name that he gives to the enteric mind.
Yeah.
The enteric mind, which is the gut brain. And
radical wholeness.
There are so many other modalities for engaging the world through the body, and as you said, at some point that mind surrenders to the more of the body, and then they work together.
That's the working together piece is the critical piece. You know what's so interesting? We started this whole show talking about this work I'm doing in Mexico.
Yeah.
What's fascinating about this is the bank in Mexico was acquired by an American bank, which is basically how we ended up down there, because the American bank recognizes that the units within the bank that have a balance of men and women perform better than those that don't. It's actually just a simple numbers game. And I know the numbers on the inside, so they really want to see diversity. It's a diversity initiative. So they want to see more women. When they acquired the bank, this is scary, less than 3% of the executive level positions were held by women, basically none. And the bank was having big problems, right? So their big initiative is to integrate. So there's this balance of men and women. And it's just exactly what Dawson was talking about, is that, you know, what comes online. And we're not making it about gender necessarily. We're just making it about this whole other, you know, natural way of processing that women are more innately, you know, sort of drawn to. We call it a horizontal model
relational,
but it's more relational.
Community
exactly.
and connection.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, it's just, again, it's
you have a challenge there, my friend, because not only will you be working inside of the structure, but you will also be working inside of the structure to address some of the circumstances outside of the structure, some of the social conditioning and the cultural conditioning.
Barnett, it's huge.
That mitigates, that mitigates against that sort of...
I'll give you an example of this. There's an expert on our team, a woman, who really is class A in a particular arena of the work. And yet, a lot of the women will defer to me. And I keep saying to them, no, this is the person who really gets it. But their programming, their conditioning is to defer to a man. So even in the middle of the leadership training, they're still more apt, because my training partner is a woman, to, defer to me for certain things. I go, I'm not the guy. She's the one that knows, but it's fascinating because, to recognize that that's what's going on. We've had a number of those kind of discoveries where, again, it's an opportunity for us to reflect back and say, hey, do you see how your own conditioning sets this up?
We have that for those of our listeners that think that this is only conceptual. How often do we find ourselves in situations or in meetings and we're addressing someone or being addressed by someone, and we notice that our attention is going to one or the other person more than everybody else because we hold them.
Happens all the time.
It happens all the time.
Happens all the time with my wife. Is that in lots of ways she's decision maker in certain arenas, and people are deferring to me. I'm like, don't talk to me, talk to her. And also with domestic stuff, I'm Mr. Mom. I do all the cooking and the shopping and the because my wife's schedule is simple. This is the modern family. We're partners, and look, she works from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. That's the nature of her work. So I do all the pickup and stuff.
That
it happened this morning.
That's a benevolent situation, though. That's not that doesn't have an obvious charge.
Yeah, in moments it is.
Sometimes
in moments it comes up. My Jasmine's like, why are they deferring to me? Or why are they deferring to you? Like, she'll get PO'd about
it.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. And if you're in a situation that sometimes a business situation or you're working on some sort of community project and people are deferring, or you find yourself, or I find myself deferring to what looks like the alpha dog only because that's how I've been conditioned. It's a shocker to really let that in, the impact that it has on yourself and on other people and the making of others invisible. And it is a chauvinism.
It is a chauvinism. You and I talked about this, that the prejudice. Look, the challenge is, the first step is recognizing the prejudice is there. And even in myself, my prejudices, my own sexist, homophobic, racist. I mean, all those things. It's like I have to be the first person to raise my hand and say, oh, I get that that's part of my programming. Now, my commitment to getting on the other side of it is very valuable, but it's almost like a default setting.
Well, the first part is to recognize it. Then the second piece, I think, is to also recognize the part of us that wants to go into overdrive and with solutions. I'll do this, I'll do that.
Not helpful.
That sort of, if we understood the resolution of those things, we would have already implemented them.
Yeah.
So the part that has all the strategies and all the judgments is part of the challenge here. But to actually be able to recognize it and put in the clutch and allow ourselves to be lifted to something else. And that's where
it requires humility.
It requires so much humility.
It really
does.
What
Dawson was referring to. This is the whole area that Dawson works in that is non-linear, whole system, and involves energy and energy fields. So there is a point when working things out psychologically has efficacy and matters. And then there's another point where you can move just to the resonance and the energies of things and allow yourself to be lifted by the mysterious, lifted by moods and states, and allow yourself to be the beneficiary of maybe a light goes on in a colleague or on somebody you see on television, and it stimulates you into a different sense of response. There suddenly seems to be a hopeful solution, but it doesn't come from your working things out, your Mr. Spock piece.
It does not. Okay, well, we've come to the end of the show, but we'll continue this thought because that's what we do. So we invite you, of course, to tune in next time to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.